The left is always inclined to look on the grim side of things. Always inclined to look on the grim side of things. The cup is always half empty. Until you point out, look, it's half full. It doesn't look so bad.
Welcome to Political Gingervitis, the crazy and zany podcast for progressives who need a laugh. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Andrew Stewart, and this week we're going to try to put a smile on your face and maybe a few thoughts in your head. Welcome again, folks, to another exciting episode of Political Gingervitis. I am your host, Andrew Stewart, and today we are going to switch the format up a little bit. Usually I start off with a little bit of comedy and then go right into the interviews, but I have an important and timely interview today. I am going to talk with the Green Party's 2016 vice presidential candidate, Ajamu Baraka. So stick around, and here he is. So, Ajamu, we are now in the summertime of the first year of the Trump presidency, and Mike Pence is quite obviously filling in a role similar to that of Dick Cheney with regards to the neocon influence on this administration. What would a hypothetical Ajamu Baraka vice presidency look like in comparison?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Andrew, because in some ways, the kind of liberal targeting of the administration that we see taking place with under Trump, I suspect that if Jill and I would have been able to pull off that historic win and take office, that the targeting, the intensity of the attacks would have been increased almost threefold. That's the first point. Secondly, the role that I would play would probably be a role that would be connected to attempting to bring some leadership to the administration's foreign policies. It would be a leadership that would have as its main objective to create a process in which we could de-escalate tensions globally. Well, we would move to assure people who are in the crosshairs of U.S. aggression that this administration was going to take a complete U-turn and would, in fact, respect national sovereignty, would jettison the plan of regime change, would respect international law, and would support the diplomatic resolution of all of the current issues that we see in play today. So that would be the role that I will play, to make sure that our administration stayed true to its principles, to the commitments we made during the campaign. We said that we were not going to compromise our principles. We were not going to be committed to just managing this unequal and oppressive relationship between the state and the people, and between dominant capital and working people, that we were in fact going to use the state apparatus to the extent possible to bring about the kinds of political reforms and economic reforms that can address the material needs of the vast majority of the people here in this country. So that would be some of the things that I would be involved in trying to do to make sure that we stayed on the straight and narrow regarding our commitments to the people who supported us, and reminding them that the kind of reforms that we want to make can't be done without their direct involvement and participation. But let me just say really quick too. I think that the role of Dick Cheney and Mike Pence are a little different. I mean, I think Dick Cheney had a much more influence in the administration than a Mike Pence. I mean, in many ways, Dick Cheney was, in fact, a sort of the co-president, in my opinion, with George Bush. I don't see that. I don't see Mike Pence playing that kind of role in the Trump administration. As a matter of fact, I see Mike Pence being relatively isolated.
Okay.
But I could be wrong.
Okay. And since the election, you've created a new organization called the Black Alliance for Peace. Can you describe the motivation for its creation? And it's got an 8-point program, so discussing that also.
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, we have pulled together a new formation, the Black Alliance for Peace. And we see this as a very important endeavor because it is our attempt to try to revive the traditional anti-war, pro-peace, and anti-imperialist positions that we have seen as an integral part of the Black community for decades. We launched this formation on April the 4th of this year to commemorate the 50th anniversary of that very famous speech that Dr. Martin Luther King made on April the 4th, 1967, in which he broke his silence on Vietnam and came out opposing that war, but more importantly, opposing the militarism that he felt was at the center of the U.S. culture, the militarism and the materialism and the racism that seemed to be driving policy both domestically and globally. So he felt compelled morally to break his silence. He saw the connection between U.S. imperialism and militarism and the inability or reluctance of the U.S. state to address issues of militarism and repression and poverty within the U.S., that the squandering of resources in these military pursuits had a direct impact and connection to the continued poverty and plight of working people in the U.S., in particular Black folks, but all working people. And so he felt like if you're going to address the issue of justice, if you are committed to notions of peace and the ideal that we can be more than what we are today, that you had to make the link between the social justice movement in the U.S. And the movement for global social justice, which means a moral opposition to militarism, to war that was negatively impacting people, millions of people around the world. So we took up that position by launching this organization. And the short-term objectives of this work right now are to oppose this obscene request on the part of the Trump administration to increase the U.S. military budget by $54 billion. They will take this budget well over $600 billion. We say that we also are going to agitate and advocate for reducing the military budget by, not only are we going to oppose the expansion, we want to reduce the military budget as a beginning point by 50% and transfer those resources to addressing the material needs of the people of this country. We are opposed to and want to raise the issue of the ongoing war in Yemen. We believe that what is happening in that country is a form of genocide that is being carried out by a U.S. vassal state, the Saudis. We think it is a moral obscenity that there's now more opposition to that criminal attack in Yemen. We are opposed to the expansion, the intervention and the expansion of the U.S. in Syria. We think it is a violation of international law that the U.S. is in fact in Syria and that the Trump administration has expressed its objective to remain in Syria even after the liberation of Raqqa. And we think that that is something that is imperative that the Black community and pro-peace elements in the U.S. oppose. And lastly, we are opposed to the continuation of the Department of Defense's 1033 program, this program that has resulted in the transference of over $4 billion worth of military equipment from the military to the police forces around the country, resulted in this obscene militarization of police forces around the country. So these are some of the short-term objectives of the Black Alliance for Peace. And we see the Black Alliance for Peace, Andrew, as part of not just developing the traditional Black anti-war position, but we see this as an important element in helping to try to revive the broader anti-war movement, anti-imperialist movement in the U.S. And that's why we've been working very closely with the United National Anti-War Coalition.
So one of the elements of that is building a kind of solidarity across international borders with Colombia, and you're also mentioning Haiti and Honduras in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Yes, most definitely, yes.
Yeah, and so building up a Green Party that aspires, or any political formation that aspires to those principles, seems to be a practical implication, because the challenge within the Green Party is real and obvious for many people, but it is an established presence on the landscape.
I think that Andrew, I think that the anti-war position, the anti-interventionist position of the Green Party is these are our positions. We should own those positions. Mm-hmm. The Green Party has been quite consistent in its opposition to intervention, to war. As your listeners know, during the campaign, one of the planks of the campaign was to initiate a peace offensive, if you will, in the Middle East, for example, to de-escalate and to move toward peace as opposed to confrontation. So this consistent anti-war position is something that the party should own. It is different than any other of the major political parties. We're not advocating, as some leading Democrat-affiliated politicians advocated, that the Saudis should get their hands dirty in Yemen or in the Middle East. We're not embraced and will support the expanded drone warfare expanded under the Obama administration. We are quite clear that we're not going to support these kinds of activities. So, that's something that I think differentiates the party, the Green Party, from the other main parties, and something that we should be quite proud of and should advocate quite boldly, that this is one of the elements that differentiates the party and one of the reasons why we should have a more popular support.
Right. So do you have any practical suggestions or ideas about building Green Parties in local areas? I've been working with our party since last year up here in Rhode Island, and it's been an interesting travel to try to build up a party and distance itself from some notions within some sectors that it's just, a middle class white hippie party and environmentalism only.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andrew, it's a challenge because that is part of this sort of general perception. But we don't have to even shy away from that necessarily in terms of the Green Party's commitment to the environment and to climate issues. We embrace that, but we also have to educate people that the Green Party is more than that. Its potential goes well beyond that. And we point people back to the values and principles of the party. And we say that it's imperative that if you believe in those values and principles, that you are prepared to, in fact, struggle to build institutions that can embody those values and principles in its work. and that means building up an apparatus, building up a third party that's prepared to struggle to have those values and principles translated into public policy. So the challenge is organization. The challenge is building the apparatus, strengthening the apparatus, and some of the practical things that should be considered. And I know people are considering these around the country because I've been having a chance since the campaign to move around. Part of my commitment during the campaign was that I would be available and would support follow-up because I advocated quite clearly that this work wasn't something that was going to end on November the 8th. That even if we would have gotten elected, that the struggle was going to continue to build real alternative popular power. So win or lose, we were committed to trying to strengthen the independent organization of this party. So one of the sectors I think is important for people to really consider is the youth sector. We have 40% of millennials who have, for example, a favorable concept of socialism. Now, one may not be a socialist on that, but what that suggests to me is that these folks have a very clear sense of a social justice consciousness, and so that sector should belong to the Green Party. So targeting students and youth, building student chapters, encouraging young people to get involved in existing Green Party chapters, but also having the ability for state Green Parties to make it to facilitate the creation of new chapters, I think is really important. Targeting to the extent that one can, labor unions, linking up with social justice organizations, identifying and working with people of color organizations in places where they exist is vitally important. So the organizing objective is what we have to keep our focus on right now, between now and 2018.
Gotcha. Are there any points in closing you wanted to bring up?
Well, only that I appreciate the work that everybody's involved in. I hope people are able to get to the National Green Party gathering next weekend. I think that I want people to understand that this is a protracted process, and to be patient and to be committed to building, and know that basically the Green Party really is, and this is more than just rhetoric, it really is on the right side of history, that there is a move toward trying to figure out new structures, new approaches to politics in the U.S. And if the Green Party believes in itself, it can be positioned to, in fact, tap into that new energy and to become a significant political force here in the U.S.
So, today we're going to talk briefly about some adventures I've had running around on the internets, which is always such a fascinating place to go and find different things to play around with, particularly when we go into the realm of the Tea Partiers, those alt-right types who are just alt-batty. Let's touch briefly on this notion of cultural Marxism. So I'm just going to pull up a random meme from the internet here and, see what happens if I read off a couple lines. Just typing right in here now in Google. Let's see. So this is from Catholicism.org. This should be interesting because Catholicism in the Western world has always been the kind of spring from whence all anti-socialism, anti-communism has sprung. So what we have here is, let's see, the phenomenon of, quote, cultural Marxism has generated much commentary in conservative circles in recent years. As a result, more people have now heard of it and its role in spawning political correctness, but the larger phenomenon and its origins are not sufficiently known by those who should oppose it. Catholics should be aware of the fact that cultural Marxism is not only explicitly and diametrically opposed to the Church's faith and morals, but that it has crafted an atmosphere which marginalizes the Church, sending Christ's mystical body over to the sidelines of social questions where she can only watch society's degeneration as a virtual helpless spectator. Wow. I had no idea that the left had that much power. I'm going to keep going with this one. That the Church seems willing to be this helpless spectator is itself a sign of how far this cultural Marxism, along with other spiritual pathogens, has penetrated even into the very institutions of the Church herself. In advancing all this, I am not trafficking in conspiracy theory. Side note, yes, you are. Dismissing your opponent's thesis as a lunatic conspiracy, as the cultural Marxists at the SPLC do in this matter. The Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris Dees is a lot of things, but he is not by any definition a Marxist. Is a facile way of evading the argument. This is especially so when a review of the available facts makes it abundantly clear that the theoreticians and practitioners of cultural Marxism openly stated their aims. One cannot call it a conspiracy when it is done so openly. No, at that point, you're just called an idiot. Moving on. In 1918, a man named György Lukács became the Minister of Culture in the short-lived communist government of Béla Kun in Hungary. Being of the opinion that Marxist theory could only be implemented where the family unit and sexual morals were broken down, Lukács implemented a bold program of social reform that mandated sex education in schools. The Hungarian people were horrified by this outrage, as well as other aspects of the Kun regime, and this Marxist government of Hungary lasted only about 180 days. Sadly, 1949 would bring a much longer-lasting communist regime to St. Stephen's great nation. Oh God, these people are crazy. In 1923, Lukács showed up for a Marxist study week in Frankfurt, Germany, where he and other Marxist thinkers met to discuss how they might spread communism. The ultimate result of this meeting was the founding that same year of the Institute of Social Research, a well-funded think tank at the University of Frankfurt. The name proposed Institute for Marxism was scrapped in favor of a more innocuous title, but the name under which it is best known is the Frankfurt School. Fast forward 10 years to 1933 when Hitler came to power, and the members of the Institute, not only as Marxists but also as Jews, most of them anyway, in parentheses, decided that Nazi Germany was a not good place to be. After a brief stay in the Netherlands, the Institute relocated to New York, where it became affiliated with Columbia University in 1934. To give some concreteness to their villainy, I will present brief thumbnails of 3 of the Frankfurt School's main members. But some word about their ideology, aims, and purposes are in order first. To a man, these people hated Western culture and Christianity, wanting to spread their hatred by a variety of means. These things were, after all, what stood in the way of progress of Marxism. I'm going to do another side note. They do realize there's a difference between Marxism and Bolshevism, right? I don't think so. It has to be remembered that Marxist theory postulated the uprising of the international proletariat against the existing bourgeoisie order. Well, I got that point right. When World War I came and went without such an uprising, well, except for the Russian Revolution and the German Revolution and the Hungarian Revolution, which they just actually mentioned. And when the workers instead seemed content with the status quo, certain communists became convinced that the directly economic approach of class warfare and the violent overthrow of the political organs of the state were bad ideas. They had learned from their failures in Hungary, and they also knew what quote unquote worked for Russia would not work for the West. So, practicing a strategic patience, they decided to impose Marxism slowly by undermining the culture, mocking Christianity, unleashing the sexual passions, trivializing the family, attacking the patriarchy, advancing feminism, and uglifying the arts. Wait, uglifying? That's a word? They would do this via a multifaceted approach in the areas of art, music, literature, education, the media, and entertainment. Their tools were quote unquote critical theory, and more on this later in parentheses, practical applications of Freudianism, and an activist spreading of their ideas in the upper and lower echelons in education. Wow, that's pretty impressive. Their ideas very much paralleled those of the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who saw Soviet Russia firsthand and noticed how Lenin and then Stalin made the workers hate the new order of things because of the state-sanctioned terror with which it was imposed on the nation. What? Gramsci too wanted to turn all people, even the despised bourgeoisie, into Marxists slowly by undermining their faith and morals, and that by cultural means. He spelled out his ideas in, among other places, his prison notebooks, so named because they were penned during his years of incarceration in Mussolini's Italy. And then in parentheses again, he died in 1937 after serving 11 years of a 20-year prison sentence. Apparently, he reconciled with God before his death. So they do realize that the prison notebooks were only published in like the 70s, right? Moving again. Here are quick thumbnails of 3 Frankfurt School notables. Max Horkheimer, who headed up the Institute beginning in 1930, married the psychological errors of Sigmund Freud to Marxist political theory. Being a Freudian, Horkheimer's thought was suffused with the erotic, and his exaltation of the sensual is perhaps best illustrated by his lauding of the famous pervert, the Marquis de Sade, as the champion of a higher morality. Really? Thanks to Horkheimer's use of Freud, communists could now explain Western man's blindness to the glories of Marxism as a result of his sexual repression, a condition that could be remedied by hypersexualizing American and European society via the arts and entertainment. What? Around the time of World War II, he spent time, along with Theodor Adorno, in Hollywood, where they would meet with Aldous Huxley and Igor Stravinsky, both radicals in their own right. The Frankfurt School luminaries were very dedicated to spreading the gospel of cultural revolution, and one can only guess at the degree to which this trip to Hollywood contributed to the film industry's constant output of indecency and blasphemy. Good God. I gotta get Paul Buell on the line to talk about that one. Next, Theodor Adorno was one of the chief architects with Horkheimer of critical theory, which is a pretentious name for a series of blistering attacks on everything traditional and Christian from a leftist perspective. In the words of William Lind, whoever that is, what is the theory? To criticize everything traditional institutions starting with the family brutally and unremittingly in order to bring them down. He wrote a series of quote-unquote studies in prejudice, which said that anyone who believed in traditional Western culture is prejudiced, a racist, or a sexist, or a fascist, and is also mentally ill. Right, because, you know, the Holocaust was just a jolly fun time, and colonialism was fantastic. Adorno also co-authored the book The Authoritarian Personality, concerning which Pat Buchanan wrote in The Death of the West, quote, "To Adorno, the patriarchal family was the cradle of fascism," unquote. A composer and music critic who understood the power of the avant-garde to undermine people's grounding in Western culture and tradition, Adorno also engaged in sociology and sought to explain the rise of fascism and Nazism by a Freudian kind of exploration of the sexually repressed, bully mind of Western man. Calling your enemy crazy is, after all, much easier than meeting him on an equal playing field. And then in parentheses, remember what we said of the Southern Poverty Law Center above. Oh, wow. Americans, he said, were all ready for a fascist regime because we were so blinded by these forces, including, of course, the repressive institution of the family. Jeez. Next up is Herbert Marcuse. Unlike Horkheimer and Adorno, stayed in the United States after the war, where he became a major figure in the New Left. In 1955, he published the book Eros and Civilization. According to Tyler Durden, he's in this? The guy from Fight Club says in his quote, "In the book, Marcuse argued that Western culture was inherently repressive because it gave up happiness for social progress. The book called for polymorphous perversity, a concept crafted by Freud. It posed the idea of sexual pleasure outside the traditional norms. Eros and Civilization would become very influential in shaping the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Marcuse would be one to answer Horkheimer's question from the 1930s. Who would replace the working class as the new vanguards of the Marxist revolution?" Again, they don't seem to be differentiating between Marxism and Bolshevism, but that's besides the point. Marcuse believed that it would be a victim of coalition of minorities, blacks, women, and homosexuals. Oh, dear Lord. The social movements of the 1960s, Black Power, feminism, gay rights, sexual liberation, gave Marcuse a unique vehicle to release cultural Marxist ideas into the mainstream. Railing against all things establishment, the Frankfurt School's ideals caught on like wildfire across American universities. Oh, I didn't know that. That's news to me. I thought it. Okay. Marcuse also popularized the work of the Frankfurt School, translating its turgid German philosophical esoterica into more approachable prose and even popular slogans. "Make love, not war" was one of his inventions. It was? Because the proletariat were not interested in a workers' revolution, the dynamism of Marxist class struggle had to be removed from the context of the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat and applied instead to various other conflicts between oppressor and oppressed, which via education, entertainment, etc., the cultural revolutionaries would themselves create. Saul Alinsky, Black Lives Matter, homosexual activists, and various other activists and movement, many funded by people like George Soros, have continued this dialectic. There's about like 9 different things that are totally against reality, and that cultural Marxism and the Frankfurt School are not the only explanation of our social ills. To say so would be a terrible monism, but the corrective effect that these particular Marxists have had is one important factor in explaining the desperate state of the world around us, which is why we need all the more treasure what the revolutionaries hate, monuments of Western culture, and much more so the Catholic Church that incubated them. So that's the end of that crazy article. I don't know whether this guy is, like, his name is Brother Andre Marie. Does this guy understand that the American left is hopelessly and totally, like, stuck in a position right now that it's not able to exert that much impact? I mean, I'm in the Green Party and I'm working to build the Green Party, and I'm working to along the lines that Ajamu Baraka is talking about in this episode. But good God, this is so over the top. Oh, so apparently we're the most powerful force in Western civilization, and we couldn't even get 2 million votes for Jill Stein in the last election. Go figure. It's so great to be wondrously powerful and yet this poor. Next up, we have an interview with Louis Proyect. He is a blogger and film critic living in New York who is a long-time and very busy thinker and scholar on all things related to the history of socialism in America. He maintains the Marxism mailing list that many email subscribers from across the world, in fact, subscribe to, including myself. He is one of the members of the North Star Editorial Collective, which is a website devoted to questions of praxis and theory and practical applications for creating a mass movement of socialist aligned thinking in the US. And he also writes film reviews for Counterpunch. I will say at the outset that there are instances where Louis and I sometimes, quite often, very vociferously will differ on any number of subjects, but as comrades, nevertheless, we were able to have a conversation that bears out some very interesting insights and thoughts, and I think that the conversation we're going to have now about Peter Camejo, the late Peter Camejo, I should say, and his efforts at building up the Green Party are particularly relevant in the Trump era because it recognizes the contours of the landscape in a way that most left-leaning people might not. It's a very interesting and fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Louis, let's start off by discussing what Peter Camejo and the North Star Network was and is.
Well, the North Star Network started, I guess, I'm not exactly sure of the month and the exact month, but I guess it was around 1981. Peter had been expelled from the SWP and had written a document called Against Sectarianism that when I read, it was like a lightning bolt out of on a blue sky, out of a blue sky. It was it amazed me that somebody could have sized up a demoralizing experience for many of us so succinctly and really so intelligently. I had been in the SWP for 11 years, and I was a casualty of this so-called turn to industry. I'd worked in one morning as a spot welder in Kansas City, and I just realized I couldn't do it and wouldn't do it. And coming back to New York, I was became very depressed, very depressed, to the point where I needed, I started taking antidepressant medication, but I just couldn't make the connection. My depression had to do with, being a member of a cult, basically, for 11 years, and how it had sort of left me in a condition, I guess you might even want to call it something like post-traumatic stress syndrome. Anyhow, after I finished reading the Peter's article, I contacted him. I said, Peter, listen, this really makes tremendous sense to me. And what's going to happen? What are you going to do? So he says, well, he was going to work with some people around the Guardian newspaper. It's not the English Guardian. This was a radical news weekly in the United States. That a number of the writers had begun to come to the same conclusion. These folks weren't Trotskyists. They were Maoists for the most part, and were the kind of people who were developing the same kind of conclusions that what's his name? I forget. He wrote a book about the new communist movement in the United States. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not exactly certain.
Yeah. Anyhow, there's a guy who was part of this experience. Wrote a book. I think it was a Verso book about how the Maoist movement had collapsed. It imploded, and they started talking to Peter. One of them is a guy named John Trinkle, who used to be a reporter for the Guardian, and they started in the Bay Area. Started something called the North Star Network. And Peter came to New York, and we met. And the next step was to start a newsletter. This was before the internet. So it was a newsletter he sent out like every month or two. I'm not sure. Within a year or two, it sort of come to an end. Some of the people who were involved in that project, the next step was they got involved with the what do they call committees of correspondence? The group that left the Communist Party. The CFC, right?
Yeah.
So Peter was part of that for I guess about a year or two. I'm not sure. And gradually he discovered that they still had a lot of the same hang-ups as the Communist Party, which really boiled down to being deeply embedded in the Democratic Party. Like I joined briefly myself. It might have been '83. I went to a meeting, and it was mostly old folks, frankly, that would get up and talk about the work they were doing in their Democratic Party club on the Lower East Side. I said, "What the hell? I didn't. This was not what I bargained for." Peter left the committees of correspondence around, shortly after. His first attempt to find out what it was doing and maybe it had possibilities. And his next step was to join the Green Party. And from that point on, I guess maybe like 84, 85, roughly, he devoted himself fully to building the Green Party. Not just running as a candidate, governor of California, he was Ralph Nader's running mate, but also to write about it from a theoretical standpoint. What does it mean to build something like the Green Party today? What are its possibilities? And from that standpoint, he had a lot in common with Howie Hawkins.
Mm-hmm.
If you read Howie Hawkins' articles, they're very much engaged with Marxism. And so what Peter was hoping to do was help to push the Green Party in that direction. And of course, he had some struggles within the Green Party with the people I describe as Demogreens. But these are a group of people that sabotage Ralph Nader's bid for running as the presidential candidate of the Green Party, and he ended up with David Cobb as a candidate. He was a terrible candidate. And the reason Cobb was nominated is they didn't want to siphon votes away from the Democratic Party. At any rate, I'm describing Peter's evolution. My trajectory is a bit different. Although I was strongly influenced by Peter's ideas, I got more involved with Central America Solidarity, was involved with committees of solidarity with people of El Salvador, and then after that, Technica, which sent volunteers to Nicaragua to get involved with engineering and computer projects with the Sandinistas, and then in Southern Africa, including work with the ANC. So I started a website called the North Star, which honors not just what Peter was trying to do, but people for years now have basically come to similar conclusions. Hal Draper wrote a series of articles about the need to break with sectarianism, in the same vein. And before Hal Draper, there was a guy named Bert Cochran, who started something called the Socialist Union. I guess around '54 would be around that time. Split from the Socialist Workers' Party, and was trying to get rid of the baggage that is associated with the Soviet Union, either Trotskyist or Stalinist. It meant dispensing with the hammers and sickles and the Red Stars, and really kind of a mechanical application of Bolshevism to the United States. And the reason he started a network called the North Star is because the North Star was the name of Frederick Douglass's newspaper. And so the idea is, if you're building a movement, what you have to do is it has to be based on the experience of American people, not Russians, not living under Tsarism. So to make a long story short, that's what the project is about, and it's an ongoing project. I've been writing about this stuff on the internet for, I started writing about it in 1991. How many years ago is that? That's almost 17 years, right? No, 16 years.
91, that would be 25 or more.
No, what is it? Yeah, it's 25, exactly. It's been that long. Yeah, wow. So, yeah, I've been writing about it for 25 years, and I've written probably at least 100 articles, trying to analyze why the left has failed, what kind of left we need. And the North Star was intended to be kind of a forum for discussing those kinds of ideas. It's not a group. It's just people who have been through a similar experience, some of whom were in the ISO. So one guy was in the Socialist Alternative, another Trotskyist group. And we reject the idea of trying to start a Bolshevik-like party in the United States with a tiny model that's like a little toy car that you could ride around in until it keeps growing and becomes a big car. It doesn't happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
It has to. A revolutionary party has to grow organically. It has to grow out of a mass movement. And when you start imposing your particular ideological understanding of the Russian Revolution on a small sect, it can't grow. You're imposing a glass ceiling. Like the ISO just had a conference in Chicago. 2,000 people showed up. That's very good, and it's part of the development of a new left. DSA is growing. Supposedly they have 20,000 members. Now, the problem with the DSA is that it has to really figure out this whole question of the Democratic Party. They're discussing it, but I don't think they really have much clarity on it yet. And the ISO will continue to grow, but it can never become as big as, in my opinion, as the DSA, because you can't ask people like myself. I'm a little too old to be joining any small group now, but you can't ask people to accept an analysis, for example, the Cuban Revolution, that goes against their grain. It's just it's that you can have a left organization that has multiple viewpoints, and frankly, that's really the way the Bolshevik Party operated. And it's just a question of people beginning to understand our real history as opposed to the history we learned from leaders of these sects that were very strong in the '60s when I got involved politically.
I'm kind of curious how much influence the work that Lars T. Lee has had on uh, the orientation or articulation of these issues, because his book on what is to be done is certainly interesting in that regard.
Well, I don't want. I'm not going to. I don't want to make it sound like Lars Lee is a plagiarist or anything like that. But I wrote an article called "Lenin in Context." I think it was one of the first things I wrote. Someone on the Marxism list I moderate. Someone asked a question, what they thought of Lenin's organizational ideas or something to that effect. And I'm sorry, I know what it was. Not long after I got involved with working with Peter, I started reading to try to understand what had happened. And Peter had recommended some books that would help me understand what Lenin was really about. What the Bolshevik Party was really about. So he recommended a book called, I think it's Lenin's Political Thought by Neil Harding. I believe the book won an Isaac Deutscher Prize, one of the early winners of the Isaac Deutscher Prize. Harding, the core of his argument is that all Lenin was trying to do was start a party that was similar to Kautsky's social democracy in Germany. And he looks at what is to be done, and other early writings of Lenin, and concludes that there were a lot of similarities, and the main difference is that the Bolshevik Party, or it wasn't really the Bolshevik Party, it was the social democracy, because the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were part of the same party. A point that an old friend of mine, Van Bin, once made, and Lars Lee agrees with. But the core of Lars Lee's analysis of what is to be done is exactly the same as Neil Harding's. And I didn't write 700 pages like Lars Lee did. I don't think. He's a guy's a serious scholar, so I don't fault him for really doing a lot of research and so on. But the idea is pretty simple, that the Russian party, the Social Democratic Party, that had both Lenin on the left and Martov on the right, all they were trying to do was build a party of the Second International in Russia. That was it. And if I could point you to many places in What Is to Be Done where he singles out Kautsky's party as being the model of what they were trying to do.
The reason I ask is that seems to not be totally absorbed by these different groups you mentioned that have a desire to build a mass movement in America.
Yeah, now some have a vested interest. If it's I can understand if you spend time building up an apparatus that it's taken many years and money to put together, like the ISO. The thought of becoming of dissolving yourself into something broader, it's very difficult to make a move like that. I don't want to make it sound like these people are venal, but the truth is, these small groups, they operate like small businesses. Okay, they compete with each other for market share. So you got groups like that. They're all doing good work. These are all really good activists, socialist alternatives, ISO. But they see themselves, it's like as small businesses competing for recruits, and that's certainly not the way that Lenin thought. the requirements for joining the German social, the Russian social democracy were fairly minimal. Workers, I said, well, what does membership mean? I says, well, I agree with the social democrats, and you would carry out work, like you might sell the newspaper to workers and your fellow workers, but you didn't have this how should I put it, expectations that people would join a group like the ISO or my group, the SWP, and get molded into this party member who, it's almost like the Borg on Star Trek. It's impossible. It's impossible to find anybody in the ISO that disagrees with their analysis of Cuba, and that's not natural.
I gotcha.
What kind of, if we were going to have a mass revolutionary party in the United States, it's going to have people have all sorts of different ideas about what Cuba was or what the Soviet Union was, and you have to push those questions into the background. You have a theoretical magazine, so you have debates about Cuba. You have debates about when the Soviet Union became capitalist or not, or if it was state capitalist or whatever. But to make those things litmus tests, it's just going to keep your membership to like the devotees.
So, where do you think the Green Party could possibly go after the results it has seen in the past 18 months?
I'm actually going to be working with another North Star editorial board member, a woman named Brandy Baker, who was in the ISO, and then got, after she left in disgust, I guess would be the word to describe it. She's been a Green Party activist for a number of years, and has become pretty upset about the directions taken. She's written some things on the North Star, and I've been meaning to write something. So we're gonna be talking to each other about what should go into this article. But at first I was very, very upbeat about Jill Stein's candidacy, to the point where in defending it, I was attacked by people I had been fairly close ties with about Syria. And then there's got to be at least 15, maybe 20 Facebook friends I had. Most of them were either Syrian or Arab, who couldn't accept what I was, the idea that I would be urging a vote for Jill Stein, and I guess they, to an extent, is a problem. They don't see things in Marxist terms. It's like I write for Counterpunch, and I couldn't be more far apart than Jeff St. Clair, the editor, on Syria. But I see Counterpunch as an important expression of left. How should I put it? A collective left that has to be moving in the same direction to build a powerful movement. And so these people that sort of had a falling out with, it was the falling out was mostly on their part, not mine, but they just couldn't see Jill Stein in the same way.
Mm.
Now, the problem is that there have been some things that I've found disturbing about the campaign, and this, by the way, it doesn't have anything to do with going to a banquet sponsored by Russia Today. It has more to do with her raising money for for legal investigations into voter fraud, and millions of dollars were raised, and I was thinking, well, what's happening with that money? So I think the most urgent need right now is for the Green Party to begin to cohere as a national organization that that there's a real membership. Like I paid $25 to join the Green Party. Okay, and what does it mean? It means I get email, like once a week or so about what's going on with the Green Party. But my feeling is that there was always a possibility for the Green Party to become something like the old time Devs Party.
Mm-hmm.
Like I went to a rally in Madison Square Garden. I guess it was the 2000 election campaign. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, 2000. Place was sold out. Michael Moore is the MC. There's 50,000 people there. All that was needed was for people in the Green Party at that point, like the sort of like the hardcore of the Green Party, like the real leadership, was to build on that, to use that as a platform to consolidate a national organization. They should have had a national conference. They should have been building a database of everybody that supported the Greens, that went to this meeting at Madison Square Garden. But the opposite happened. They were frightened by the power of the Green Party, which took away votes from Al Gore. Okay,
Right.
That's going to happen. You can't start a new party in the United States on the left that's not going to take votes away from the Democratic Party. And so the next thing happens, 2004, David Cobb is the candidate. So I didn't, it just doesn't make any sense. I had hoped that Jill Stein would have, who seemed ready to take on the Democrats, would have gone all the way in that direction. But her politics are not the same as Howie Hawkins or Peter Camejo. It's her ideas are kind of like it's pretty obvious that what she does is she reads Huffington Post and Alternet, watches MSNBC, and her ideas are just like a grab bag of popular left opinions, including I have to say her ideas on Syria. So.
And admittedly, I mean, part of me playing devil advocate here, you do need a candidate that can unite the left and right wings of your party.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give her credence for that fact. She is able to bring together the disparate factions that exist within the Green Party. And so I think that does present some advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. So I just think that I don't know. Maybe you said this or somebody said it, that the Green Party is not a national party. It's a collection of state parties that pretty much operate by their own rules.
And that is one aspect, yeah, that is worth getting into because, I've had interactions with members of the Massachusetts Green Party, and Rhode Island being as small as it is, the interchange would be quite fruitful and frequent. And, we're on two different planes of existence, and there's no coordination on a national level that's creating the sort of presence or guidance that's necessary to materialize a real national policy.
Yeah, but there. It's like this. There's the fact that the DSA has 20,000 members, even if it's only people who, paid the dues to join, and that you got 2,000 people going out to an ISO conference. There's a going back to the Occupy movement. There's a slow, steady growth of the left in the United States. You have young people being polled who say they prefer socialism to capitalism, whatever that means in their mind. Like that might not mean Cuba, it might mean Sweden, whatever. It has to continue to develop, because there are objective conditions that are forcing people to move in that direction. Like there's some people I like in Philadelphia called the Philly Socialists. They're having a conference, I guess in August, and they say that there are something like 27 groups like them that are going to be coming to this national conference. So you have them, you have the DSA, you have the ISO going, you have what's her name in Seattle,
Kashana Swant.
So yeah, exactly. These are harbingers of something that's out there that's palpable.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm trying to do is, the short number of years I have left, frankly, is to try to influence developments in a way that people don't make the mistakes that we made in the 60s and 70s. And that to a large extent is what North Star is about. And it's also what the Marxism list is about. Just trying to explain what works and what doesn't work.
That's all we got for the time for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for another episode of Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart, and I want to remind you again, America's greatest social democratic period corresponded with the lives of those wonderful commies, Larry, Curly, and Moe.